the sweetest thing that I ever knew. But I don't care for sugar, honey, if I can't have you. Since you abandoned me, my whole life has crashed. Won't you pick the pieces up, 'cause it feels just like I'm walking on broken glass. The sun's still shining in the big blue sky, but it don't mean nothing to me. Whoa, let the rain come down, let the wind blow through me. I'm living in an empty room with all the windows smashed, and I've got so little left to lose that it feels just like I'm walking. Yes, it feels just like I'm walking on broken glass. Now every one of us was made to suffer, every one of us was made to weep, but we've been hurting one another, and now the pain has got too deep. So save me from the wreckage, save me from the blast. Lift me up and take me back, don't let me keep on walking. I can't keep on walking on, I can't keep on walking on broken glass. Walking on broken glass.
That was Walking on Broken Glass, one of Annie Lennox's many solo hits. And you know, as a young lass in Aberdeen, Scotland, Annie Lennox was musically inclined, very musically inclined, in fact, from singing to playing a toy piano. By the age of 17, she won a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music in London for her flute playing. Annie, do you still play the flute?
No. Well, wow, I lie.
Yeah?
I picked it up the other day and I was using flute, and it was just so strange because this is an instrument that I fell in love with when I was just a kid.
Yeah.
And I really just had a passionate thing about the flute. The sound of the flute is beautiful. But funnily enough, I totally lost interest in it. It was just something I don't know whether it was because I was just kind of taught too much.
Yeah.
But once I lost interest in it, that was it. And it kind of coincided with becoming interested passionately in singing. So it was like I dropped one and the other thing came through.
So let's go back to the beginning when you left school and you were working in a London cafe, and this is when enter Dave Stewart, your second half of the Eurythmics walks in.
Well, I mean, really, I left school and went to the Royal Academy of Music, and I stayed there for 3 miserable years, trying to figure out what I was going to do, because I understood I can't be a classical musician. This is not a world for me. I don't belong here. I figured out, okay, I'll stay in London, and then in any case, I realised I wanted to sing, and so I thought, okay, I want to sing. I want to write songs. I want to record. How do I do that? And even to this day, to be quite honest with you, I still don't really know what the formula for that is, because I mean, part of it is a kind of synchronicity, with like you have to kind of meet other people that you connect with on an artistic level.
That's key.
Well, it's very important. First of all, you have to meet other people that you can connect with and play with or sing with or write with or whatever you want to do with them creatively. But then you also have to meet people that can represent you properly in terms of management. It's terribly important.
Such a juggling act to get all of that.
I mean, all of that was like, it was like an obstacle course, to be quite honest with you. And Dave and I went through a lot of experiences together where, we encountered some pretty rotten deals, and we were in litigation for a year, for example. That held us back a lot. And, to actually survive in this thing called the music industry, I mean, nowadays, one of the main, I suppose, like the biggest A&R areas really are in things like American Idol, which is a very, very different thing to like being in an indie band, for example. They're complete antithesis of each other. And you see a lot of people that like they're very young and they're gifted and they come up real fast, like rockets ascending, and all the lights blazing. But that's fine. But if you can't hack it, if you can't handle that exposure, especially that people are not just interested anymore just in like in the music that you're making, but there's a huge industry of celebrity that young people have to kind of go through. It's like it's part of the course, and it's hugely invasive. So how you deal with that kind of exposure is like, it's not for everyone, and it's tough. You know, people think they want to be famous, but they don't know why they want to be famous.
No,
they just think, oh, it must be fantastic.
TV, yeah, exactly.
You know?
And you had mentioned earlier that you had said there has to be the right creative vibe with the right people, and you and Dave Stewart had that.
Completely.
When you guys met, I know what he thought of you, because it was obvious that it was love at first sight, or at least he says that.
Well,
but I was curious what your first impression.
Words.
What was your first impression of him when he walked into that restaurant that day?
I thought the manager was going to throw him out.
Really?
Because he looked so wild.
What did he look like?
Oh, I'm not going to describe him.
It was that bad?
Wild. It was wild looking.
Wild in a good way,
you know,
or in a scary way?
Not at all. He was so sweet. He was so amenable, but he did look wild. He looked
rode hard and hung up wet. Was that
something? I don't know. You know, it was like he was definitely something going on there. God bless. And actually, it wasn't until I met him after that. I think I made an arrangement to meet him like a couple of days later or whatever, and I just met this very, very sweet person, and that I wanted to save actually, because he was kind of like wild, and
somebody tells me you're being very kind.
Well,
he was
you know, he wouldn't hold back if he was here.
No,
he would tell you himself.
He came in with Ringo, actually. He was lovely, and I didn't get to spend enough time with him. He was really nice.
Well, you know, we've all been through all kinds of journeys, especially artistic people, you know, that we've lived on that side, that edgy side of things.
When you and Dave started the first band that you were in, which eventually became the Tourists, you had a lot of success with that. You put out 3 albums.
We had some success,
but it wasn't necessarily the success that you were hoping for, because you were trying to break ground with a different sound, right?
Well, the Tourists were a certain configuration of people, and it was a certain thing at that point. And when it fell apart, it was like Eurythmics broke through. It was like the Tourists had been the chrysalis from Dave and I, and that we became the other entity that emerges out of that experience.
You know, after you guys put out your first album, I believe it was In the Garden, was the first Eurythmics album, but it was very limited, and I had read somewhere, and I don't know if this is true, but you were ready to basically throw in the towel with the Eurythmics.
I was always ready to,
the
I was always, like me, I'm a much more optimistic person now. I think I've really developed a far more positive attitude in life. Most of my sort of young adult life, I was always ready to throw in the towel. And I always thought it was all a waste of time, that nothing was any good. I'm so incredibly self-critical. A lot of artists are. Your own worst critic, your own sort of biggest enemy, if you like. And I think it was hard for Dave because, you know, a lot of the time I was like, oh, this is no good. And he was the positive one, the driving force. And yet, I would always come up to the plate because at the end of the day, I didn't want to let him down. I didn't want to let myself down. And I would pull it out. You know, I'd pull it out at the end of the day. And sometimes I think some of the process of songwriting for me has often been quite difficult and quite painful. And like it was a struggle. And then maybe that was part of the process as well.
One of the things I loved about the Eurythmics was that you portrayed yourself as not only pioneers, a pioneering duo, but you were also equals. You portrayed yourself as equals, artistic equals. Was that purposeful, or was that just a natural thing that you two had?
It was almost like we could finish each other's sentences because we really lived each other's lives. You know, we shared a life together and we shared a creative world together. And as such, we were equals, although I was the female counterpart to obviously Dave being a man, and his talents, his gifts, you know, his fantastic guitar playing, and his wonderful gift for like positive, constructive creativity, and making things happen, having this kind of energy around him that facilitated good
like
things
leadership?
happening. It's almost like, yeah, maybe leadership.
Well, on that note, we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back. Coming up, how Annie Lennox braved departing the Eurythmics to strike out on her own. Plus, she'll perform another Eurythmics hit when Private Sessions returns right after this. P.S. Did you know the 1980s pioneering duo The Eurythmics never officially called it quits? Well, now you know.